We continue with the 1950s and a really short one today. We will talk about a particular group that might sound familiar. After a world war, there was a group of writers and poets who criticized American consumerism and conformity and felt that the American middle-class society of consumerism and buying things, the baby boom years that we've talked about, really were missing something super important about what it means to be American. If that reminds you, hopefully, of a group called the Lost Generation, it should. But the Beats are a very different group indeed, and we will meet them now. Please try very hard not to mix up the Beats with somebody we're going to talk about on Friday called the Beatles. They are very different groups indeed. And we start, of course, with a film clip that lets us in to understanding who the people were, how they spoke about what they were trying to do, and the music that inspired them, called bebop jazz.
Do you like music?
Very much.
Swell. The records are right in the cabinet.
Well, is it okay with you, sir? Sure, kids. Go ahead. Well, thank you.
Pick something groovy, Alex.
Well, listen, let me tell you, baby, what I'm talking about. Come on back to me, little girl, so
Elvis and rock and roll arrived in the 50s, and kids stopped listening to their parents' music.
Come back.
Beat poets, led by Jack Kerouac and moving to the rhythms of jazz, took the rebellion underground and inspired a counterculture. Something strange was happening. In the land of Eisenhower, Doris Day, and the segregated South, young kids were dancing to black music, celebrating sex, and hitchhiking across the country. To their worried parents, there was only one comfort. Surely, this new beat would never last.
You better dig this next number.
Ow! Take it!
Come on. Come on. Come on.
In the late 40s and early 50s, New York City was pulsing with the beat of a new music, bebop. It was an original African-American sound that was changing the rhythm of the city's culture.
In that era when your life is a movie, that was the music of the movie. You could walk over to the 5 spot and hear Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane. That was the house band. That music was making an expression of the times, the way that the painting was, the statement about the time, a rhythm about the time that was very inspiring.
Come on.
Musicians, painters, and writers migrated to New York in search of new ways to express a discontent with the limits of post-war life. One of these was a young aspiring writer named Jack Kerouac.
When I first met Kerouac, I was a poet, and I was studying at Columbia. I was amazed how beautiful he looked, and how serious he was, and how friendly he was to me. I don't know what he thought of me, but he liked the idea that I thought of myself as a poet. He had a kind of dark handsomeness, certainly, and a clarity of features. He had a very handsome face, but also a kind of a very tender, melancholy, brooding, intelligent mind.
Kerouac and Ginsberg banded together to form a loose group of poets and writers known as the Beats.
I think what attracted us was that everybody was somewhat interested in literature, poetry, art, and to define some kind of new vision of America.
The search for a new vision took the Beats underground to the late-night bars and cafeterias around New York's Times Square.
Kerouac began picking up on the word beat, drawn from a common vocabulary of Times Square, meaning in those days exhausted, worn out, maybe homeless, maybe up all night, not wanting to be hassled. It didn't mean beaten. It didn't mean the beat of drums. It didn't mean hearing the beat man snap, 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 all that hippy-dippy stereotype you get on mass media. It just meant emotionally and intellectually exhausted and wide open and maybe receptive to some other awareness, some more deeper perception.
The other beat driving Kerouac was the rhythm of jazz. He didn't want to be just another writer. He wanted to be a jazz musician who played the typewriter. The jazz player that meant the most to Kerouac was Charlie Parker.
Charlie Parker was the greatest alto saxophonist who ever lived. I mean, this is a guy who believed everything should be original. And, you know, some people said that he was able to invent classics on his feet.
What Kerouac admired about Charlie Parker was his ability to take American standards, speed them up, give them new rhythms, and make them his own.
To Charlie Parker, the original High on the Moon is just a folk tune. Right? Da 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 da. Yeah, I'm playing like that. That other sounds like a folk tune beside that. How much more complicated and how much more swaying it is.
Kerouac was picking up on the fact that the cadences were like spoken language, that you could use those rhythms in writing. So what Kerouac was doing was taking that same kind of new rhythmic beat into his prose and his poetry.
It's the beat generation. It's Bayat. It's the beat to keep. It's the beat of the heart. It's being beat and down in the world and like old-time lowdown. And like in ancient civilizations, the slave boatmen rowing galleys to a beat.
Kerouac had found his form. Now he needed a subject. Then, one day in 1947, a real-life hero walked in the front door of Kerouac's apartment.
Who put the band's a dream in Mrs. Murphy's old feet?
Kerouac called him a young Gene Autry, a sideburns hero of the snowy West. In Kerouac's novels, he would become Dean or Cody, but his real name was Neil Cassidy, a restless seducer who had slept with countless women and stolen over 500 cars.
To him, sex was the only holy and important thing in life. That mad Ahab at the wheel, wrapped up in a fast car, a coast to reach, and a woman at the end of the road.
Neil Cassidy had this lust for adventure and lust for some spiritual adventure. He had the energy to cross the country maybe in 72 hours, driving continuously, just on his natural exuberance. I think Kerouac speaks of Neil's unspeakable American enthusiasm. Like as if some old queen in New York said, "Oh, he's unspeakably enthusiastic, my dear." Neil would visit Kerouac and try to learn how to write, talk about writing with Kerouac. Then in 1947, he invited Kerouac to go on the road. And so this was the perfect opportunity to go out with a totally American character across America.
Sal, we gotta go and never stop going till we get there.
Where are we going, man?
I don't know, but we gotta go.
Across America, Kerouac began writing a novel in his mind, a beat novel, set to the rhythms of bebop that would discover for a new generation the American dream of a land without limits.
The only people for me are the mad ones. The ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, 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 like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars.
So, who are the Beats, as we just saw? They are young writers and artists in their teens and 20s, much like the Lost Generation was, although these guys are younger. And they're coming of age after World War II. They didn't fight in the war, but they were a little young for that. But as the war ends, they are coming of age now. And they look at American culture and they see just conformity and materialism and consumerism in the late 40s and early 50s. What they want to write about is their own vision of a different kind of America. As they said in the film clip, of a land without limits. Poems like Howl by Allen Ginsberg, openly sexual, and using curses and rebelling against middle-class values. Jack Kerouac and his book On the Road about his friend Neil Cassidy, acting out sexual freedom, experimenting with all kinds of drugs, seeing and experiencing the world in a new way. It's like modernism, but it's even further than that, because it's going even further off of what's acceptable in a consensus America, baby boom, everybody should be the same, Mickey Mouse Club kind of America. We're going to watch one more film clip to see what happens to the Beats near the end. They get banned, they get derided and scorned, and then we'll go back to some more notes about these writers and the freedom that they're trying to express. Being beat, as they said, sorry, before we get to the film clip, meant exhausted or defeated, so open to new ways of seeing the world. And it's New York's Greenwich Village, and their inspiration, just like the Lost Generation, so inspired by black jazz in the 1920s, is bebop jazz, a new kind of experimental improvisational jazz made by musicians like you saw and heard the alto saxophonist Charlie Parker, who did a whole lot of drugs and ended up dying of an overdose at the age of 37. Their writing and art wants to make them musicians whose instruments are the typewriter, to improvise using words and painting the same way that bebop jazz musicians do. And as we mentioned a minute ago, the major beat works On the Road by Jack Kerouac and Howl by Allen Ginsberg. They made a movie On the Road a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, with Kristen Stewart from the Twilight movies, and Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter, as Allen Ginsberg. I believe he's Allen Ginsberg. He might have been Kerouac. I don't remember the movie that well. But it was trying to bring that on-the-road experience onto modern film to sort of get into that generation. And now, let's see what happened to the Beats.
Beat culture did not delight the establishment. One morning, Allen Ginsberg woke up to find that Howl, the poem he had written in defense of personal freedom, had been banned for obscenity. Kerouac, plucked from obscurity, suddenly became an object of public scorn and ridicule. Mainstream critics attacked his style with surprising bitterness.
And it was a case of kill the messenger. He was sort of perceived as an enemy, somebody, a harbinger of a very, very threatening cultural change. People objected to the way that he wrote, and said it wasn't writing, it was typing.
While the Beats were mocked by the mainstream, they were also absorbed by it. Books and movies exploited a popular fascination with the Beats. So unlike the rest of society, they seem to inhabit an entirely different universe.
At the time of the Sputnik, a San Francisco columnist, Herb Cain, thought, oh boy, these poets, they're out of this world. So said, beat Nick, beat plus Sputnik. And naturally the press thought that was very good way of mocking the artistic activities and also headlining the berets, bongos, and bedbug aspect of what they saw. They gave beatniks a bad name.
These are the beatniks, the defiant young, coming from every walk of life, wrought with suppressed emotions, and mocking the everyday course of modern society, intent on striking back as they wage a battle for their right to be heard. The Beatniks!
The Beatniks! I tried to watch that movie. Truly terrible Hollywood takeoff on the Beats. So, our significance summarizing the Beats. The Beats, writers and poets after World War II who reject American consumerism, materialism, and conformity. They're either ignored or made fun of, mocked by mainstream middle-class conforming America. But as we are going to see next week, they have a tremendous impact on baby boom kids to rebel against their parents' suburban lifestyle, against their values. And this is going to lead to youth movements in the 1960s, very much inspired by this freedom of expression that the Beats stand for. Now, freedom of expression is a very important aspect of some 1950s culture, as we will find out next time when we meet a young fella named Elvis Aaron Presley and a new style of music that he is heralding called rock and roll.